Did you know that the Great Indian Bustard is an endangered bird species? Less than 100 are alive in the wild. And did you know that in 2019, the Supreme Court imposed a blanket ban on overhead power transmission cables to protect the Great Indian Bustard? Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Last week, the Supreme Court did something very rare. It walked back its order of 2019. This pertained to the blanket ban on overhead power transmission cables, which were in the area of the Great Indian Bustard, the endangered species of birds in Rajasthan. The court's decision to go back on its order was inspired by its desire to balance what it believes to be two equally critical objectives. One, to protect the environment and the habitat, thereby the Great Indian Bustard, and on the other, to preserve the overall environment to protect against the growing effects of climate change. To preserve this delicate balance between these two objectives, the Supreme Court in its order held that there should be a more holistic approach and not the conventional way of making binary choices. To unpack this new mantra of the Supreme Court to resolve green conflicts, we spoke to Debadityo Sinha. He is the lead for climate change and ecosystems at the Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy based in Delhi. I began by asking Debadityo his thoughts on the Supreme Court's decision to reframe the debate on growth versus development. Rather than the traditional binary choice, it was suggesting a more holistic approach. Let me read critical paragraphs from the order which will help you understand the big pivot that the Supreme Court is trying to attempt. It is imperative to recognize the intricate interface between the conservation of an endangered species such as the Great Indian Bustard and the imperative of protecting against climate change. Unlike the conventional notion of sustainable development, which often pits economic growth against environmental conservation, the dilemma here involves a nuanced interplay between safeguarding biodiversity and mitigating the impact of climate change. It is not a binary choice between conservation and development, but rather a dynamic interplay between protecting a critically endangered species and addressing the pressing global challenge of climate change.
When I read the judgment, and so basically there's observation part and there is a direction part. So it appears to be quite paradoxical because in the direction it says that Supreme Court is not efficient enough to give give direction which is of the environmental policy matter. But if you see the judgment, of the observation, we're talking about holistic. I don't, if you want to say anything, consider anything as a holistic, then the first thing you have to, you have to have complete information, and the view cannot be one-sided. When I read the whole judgment, including the observation, it appears to me that Supreme Court has already taken a side with the power generation, and there are several examples which I can discuss more. But I think it is not a holistic observation at all.
See, the Supreme Court's primary argument seems to be that yes, it is very important to protect the Great Indian Bustard, but at the same time, not at the cost of development. So they are saying balance the two, don't choose between the two. You agree?
No, see, now here also I have different point of view. Though, Supreme Court job is not to balance views, right? Supreme Court job is to see what is right, what is correct for, and what is as you said, holistic or whatever. Okay. Now here, the petitioner didn't say that they're against the power line, they're against solar panel. The petitioner only said that these high tension power cables are the major cause of the mortality of the birds. And it includes GIB, it includes many other birds. There is a Wildlife Institute of India, which is a government premier institute, which says per year 1 lakh birds are dying only in Thar region from these power lines. And you see, GIB is one of the, you can say, it's a flagship species in the state bird of Rajasthan, and also it is one of the most critically endangered. I've seen it classified as critically endangered because its population is now around 100, okay, which is a wild population in the wild, okay. And there is a small population in other states, but it is mostly extinct from other states.
The point about your critiquing the judgment is fair. I'm just trying to elicit the larger trends that they seem to be arguing, whether rightly or wrongly. So, can you just weigh in on that? That's what I wanted to bring out because they're trying to get into some territory which is interesting from outside, someone like me. So, I'll say, for example, they have d- to address this conflict which you have dwelled on in such detail. They have looked at the intersection of climate change and human rights, and thereby inserted a new variable in the conversation. So my question is, will this judgment then set a precedent in similar, instances in future?
Yes, definitely. If you see in India's environmental jurisprudence, environmental law, they are very much influenced by what Supreme Court has said. So and down the lane, maybe 2 years or 10 years, we will see that it has impact on the public narrative, on the political narrative, and the laws, everything. Okay, so definitely, and this is the first time I think, and Supreme Court has been this kind of defining rights. Supreme Court has done since last 3-4 decades. Right to clean environment, right to pollution-free water, right to sleep peacefully. Okay, as a part of fundamental, right. So, and this is climate change is now a big issue, and the important thing here is that Supreme Court will say all these things whenever law is weak. So that means, the laws are not sufficient. So Supreme Court has interpreted, or you can say, expand the definition. But this was always there. Supreme Court has to just remind, the nation that this is also important, and you have to think about this. So this has a larger implication, not only law, but as a general, public narrative also.
Okay. Just taking this forward, my reading of the judgment suggests that they are defining India's plans, for sustainability as a complex interplay of environment conservation, social equity, economic prosperity, and climate change. So, this is opposed to the existing binary of environment versus growth, which is normally where it is framed. So, how do you view this? Because they have added new parameters to the conversation, thereby many more permutation combination of interpretations.
Yeah, actually, ideally, this is a positive thing that Supreme Court is considering all these different aspects of, policy and all those things in the judgment. But again, as I said, whatever Supreme Court observes or says in a judgment, it doesn't remain to that specific circumstance. Okay, it becomes a precedent. And now the major problem here is that this may be misused. For example, transmission lines not only in Rajasthan. Tomorrow, a government in other states they will say that we want to bring transmission lines, all these things. So the problem is how much weightage do you want to give to particular aspect? Okay, so this is the main thing. So we have to see, how it translates to the implementation of the law, or how the states see it, and how people use it. But it is very complicated, and it's like as the law is always double-edged sword. But now it opens a new, broad interpretation. So it will be for the government will be they will be, or any company they will be using at their convenience. So there's everything for everyone, but the most powerful one will be the one who will be using it for their.
But what about the principle? You see, because say climate change as a threat is only recognized in the last 4-5 years. I mean, people have been talking about it, but it has become center stage only in the last 4-5 years. So it is now entering legal interpretations, which is what I was alluding to. So in this case, they have introduced climate change as a factor, and whereby it impacts human rights and people's livelihoods and lifestyles, whatever. And then they say that given this situation, it's not a simple either or. So we need to find some kind of midpoint. So I'm asking
Yeah.
you that there seem to be expanding the scope of this conversation. You agree?
Definitely. I agree that it is kind of the scope of the conversation, and in future, like just for example, whenever someone goes to the court taking an environmental issue, so they always cite precedent of the previous judgment. In that judgment, court has said this is a fundamental right. But now I think the next few decades, at least, this judgment will be cited by anyone who is seeking environmental justice or even seeking compensation. For example, there are extreme weather events. Now there is a report I was reading 75% of the Indian districts are under the influence of extreme weather events. So and there are people who are affected, like extreme floods or extreme drought. So it may be can be strategically used by people to seek compensation or seek relief from whoever, government or the people who are responsible for this thing. So definitely it has expanded the scope, and this can be strategically, and it's a positive development if you consider purely as a academic thing.
So now, you see, the thing is, the Supreme Court also seems to have placed a premium on fighting climate change through various factors. I just want to highlight one of them, that they have identified air pollution, which is in our face, particularly in Delhi. So they say that solar power is that critical step which can help you fight that climate change. And now solar power, because of these overhead cables issue, runs into a conflict with the environment and, in this case, wildlife. So they have. That's why I said they've brought in human rights as an element to, open up a new debate and kind of make more nuanced, as it were.
Yeah. So actually, from my point of view, is a little bit different. Is that okay? Fundamentally, you are saying that we have to address climate change. No one denying that. Okay, we all say that we have to address that, and solar is a better option than any other thing. It is also accepted. But agreeing to what the government is promoting or some companies are promoting as a only solution, this is what is problematic. Now you have to see the ecological impact of any solution you are going to propose. Now you may say कि solar was अच्छा है, but what is the ecological cost of solar? Solar needs so much water to clean the panels. Okay, do we have so much water in Rajasthan and this Thar region to clean those panels? Solar will need so much land if you want to have big solar plant. Here they are talking about the big solar power plants, not rooftop. Okay, so one option can be having more rooftop solar, and you have decentralized solar development in clusters. One is you want to have big solar power plants where some big corporate will be investing, and so I was reading some news, and if you follow the electoral bond also, there are several companies which are funding political parties who are interested in solar power plants in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and other places. Okay, so there is already a market for that, and they want big this kind of projects. So you have to see the nuances of it. Whether the solution is actually is only marketed as a greenwash as a solution, or there can be better solution. Okay, so there is nothing black and white.
One of the points the Supreme Court made was that they accepted the government's argument that this birds population, this specific bird population, has been declining since the 60s, much before the overhead cables issue came up. So, how do you react to that?
No, see, no one denying that. As we have problems, we talk about the solutions. Okay, and there is a thing called precautionary principle. Okay, this is it's a well settled principle in the environmental law and everywhere, any policy also. Now, today we have airplane accidents, we have road train accidents. Okay, all these things happen. But can we give the argument that historically in last 100, 200 years we didn't have plane crash, so we don't have to put safety measures for the planes? Whenever you do some new technology which is unknown to a territory, which is evolutionary against the survival of the species, then we have to take the measures. So this argument is fundamentally flawed.
So another thing I noticed in the order was that the Supreme Court has cut the government a lot of slack because it has already committed to international agreements, particularly the International Solar Alliance, which India has co-authored, which you're aware of. So is this a new trend where the courts are cognizant about India's international commitments commitments while delivering these domestic judgments?
See, under Constitution, there is one provision that says that India has to obey this treaty, and you can go to Supreme Court invoking those provisions. That is, Supreme Court is fine. But again, I am saying, why we are only considering this only one treaty? Okay, and also again, it is not against this. But there also we have signed this Convention of Migratory Species. We are signatory of CBD. All this kind of biodiversity targets are also there. Okay, and we have recently we are signatory of this Convention of Migratory Species in India. Rajasthan, Gujarat is part of the Central Asia Flyway. So there is a route of migratory birds, which this is also part of our international agreement that we have to make sure their migratory pathways are free of any encumbrances and we have to make the habitat safe. GIB and several more species, they frequently there is a long distance, short distance. Some birds which move from Pakistan to India, some India to Pakistan. There's some bird which come from other countries to India. So these wires are also threat to them as well. Okay. So in the whole judgment, we haven't talked anything about the international India's commitment to this biodiversity and migratory species, all these things. So again, what I say, this whole judgment, if you read, it has taken only one-sided view. That's why I'm saying it is a problematic because international agreement no one is denying, but you have to again, if you want to balance, then you take the holistic view also. Like it's not just saying holistic. You also consider what is the other treaties here and whether we can actually compromise on other treaties because to get to meet some one treaty. Okay, so again, this myopic view will not help us.
In the final analysis, it is clear that the Supreme Court has drawn a new line in the sand, as it were, to deal with emerging green conflicts. It has suggested a more holistic approach rather than the traditional binary choice of either growth or development. However, what it has done is to complicate matters because by introducing new variables, the debate becomes very nuanced. So it goes beyond the binary confines. Let's take this instance for example. These overhead transmission cables are critical to evacuate solar power that is going to be generated in this area of Rajasthan. That is vital green energy for India's battle against climate change. However, they also endanger wildlife, in this instance the Great Indian Bustard. Clearly, the choice will not be so simple. It will have to be nuanced and that much more difficult to achieve. After all, this is for a reason that it is called a trade-off. So it is never going to be a perfect decision. Remember, perfection is the enemy of good. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNews Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please to share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.